Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. It is finally time for the 2020 postseason power rankings. The grand finals are behind us. Let's jump into this, talk about where I have the teams in my postseason 2020 power rankings. Today's video is going to be for the spots of 20 through 11, so the bottom 10 teams in the league. And I want to just throw this out there real quick because I know people are going to probably get upset with some of the places that have some of these teams and whatnot. So I want to say two things. One, the bottom half of this ranking is much harder than the top half because with the bottom half, you don't have any real sense of where they are cross-regional because the APAC teams didn't play against the NA teams. Hangzhou and Chengdu never played Washington and Vancouver, and you have very few teams that had any type of cross-region play. It's really only Seoul, New York, London, San Francisco, Philadelphia. Like, those are the only teams really that played like cross-regional. I guess a little bit Vancouver, but that was the old roster. And then so you don't have a ton of things that really happened, and so there's not a ton of major cross-regional play to get from the bottom half of the league. So it's very difficult, and so my rankings may be a little weird and a little odd, and they may differ greatly from a lot of other teams or a lot of other rankings that you see. Obviously, it's also just my opinion, so that's really why they'll differ. The second thing I want to say was that they are, at the end of the day, my opinion, so they might differ a lot. They might differ only a little bit. It just comes down to really what I feel and which teams I think look the best. But I'd love to hear your own thoughts on any of the spots that I put teams in the comments down below, because I like having a conversation about teams and where they are in the power rankings. But let's just jump into it. Let's talk about the team at number 20, which I think is no real surprise. It is the Boston Uprising. Not a great season for the Boston Uprising, a team that through everything, through every match and every week of play, was only able to manage 3 wins. That includes their playoff win over the Houston Outlaws. This Boston Uprising team was not good. They had a lot of problems. They only had 2 DPS players, so they had a lack of DPS flexibility. They had 1 off-tank, and their off-tank position was a rotating door for a long time. So they had that problem. They had a main support where they had to get rid of him, and while Myeonbong and Fusions had relatively good seasons, they still suffer from this problem of organizational chaos and disorder that really just holds these players back. This Boston Uprising team struggles a lot now. They have struggled greatly, and there's really no surprise that this Boston Uprising team is here at number 20. They have a lot of potential with some of their players, but ultimately, based on their performance in 2020, they are here at the number 20 spot. New coach going into 2021, maybe things will change, but for now, they are the worst team in the Overwatch League in my eyes. At number 19, I have the Vancouver Titans. Struggled a lot, obviously, end of the season with 6 wins, but 2 of those wins came with the original Vancouver Titans roster, the 2019 Vancouver Titans roster, the runaway roster. So only 4 wins for this Vancouver Titans team, this new roster, which, to be honest, wasn't the worst. It's not an awful amount of wins, but they never really got their footing. They were never really able to put together great results. They had some good players. Shockwave was a very good player, had a lot of really great performances throughout the time that he had in 2020. And I think that KSA was a pretty good player, but ultimately it wasn't enough for them to be able to really compete with the best teams. They struggled a lot. I think this is a team that will probably undergo a lot of changes going forward. I expect them to bring in a lot of new players going into 2021. I would be surprised if they keep many of the players that they have right now, but it'll be interesting to see what they do. But ultimately, the Titans finish here at 19 in my power rankings because they were just never really able to put anything together, and their success was super limited, and they were pretty weak for the most part. At number 18, I have the Houston Outlaws, maybe a little bit controversial. They finished the season with a 6-15 record, minus 18 differential. A lot of teams finish the season 6-15, so it's not that crazy to look at these and say, hey, they're not that good. But my reasoning for putting Houston here behind some other teams that we'll get to in a second is that Houston really struggled. They were one of the worst teams at the beginning of the season, obviously one of the only teams to lose to Boston, and they did it twice. And when you look at this Houston Outlaws roster, they had a lot of problems. They never had a consistent main tank player. Muma struggled at the beginning of the season. When they brought in Hydration, he was never really that good. Yes, they had their win in the Summer Showdown over the Florida Mayhem, which was a very good win, and I'm not going to discount them for what they were able to do there. But they never really were able to push any top teams. They struggled a lot throughout the season. They had a really kind of rotating door at their DPS position. They were never really solidified other than Dante. Linkser played a decent amount. Blase played a decent amount. By the playoffs, they had Hydration in DPS once again, with Blase playing the Roadhog. It was a really weird season for this team, and I think that they're a team that will be better going into 2021, but they just had too many weird inconsistencies and weird issues with players that they had on this team that weren't really all that good. And I think this is really kind of the Houston Outlaws' opportunity to improve what they have done and add a number of players that will benefit them. But 2020 just was not their year. They had some good moments, I think, but ultimately they were just a very disappointing team and were never really able to put anything together. Moving on to number 17, I have the Washington Justice. Yes, the Washington Justice were incredible in the playoffs. They added Decay, and this Washington Justice team was unstoppable. The only teams they lost to in North America in the playoffs were the San Francisco Shock and the Philadelphia Fusion, who both played in Grand Finals weekend. They were the best two teams in North America. They were able to run the gauntlet of the playoffs, and you have to give them a lot of credit for that, but that doesn't discount the fact that throughout the season, they only managed to win 4 matches in the regular season. They also had a couple wins in tournament play. Obviously, they had a qualification win over the Boston Uprising going into the Summer Showdown, and they beat the LA Gladiators in the Summer Showdown. Summer Showdown was a weird time, and so I don't really know how to really judge that one properly. But what we saw from this Justice team with Decay was very, very good. It showed a lot of promise. We saw that players like Tuba and Stitch and Janu and Aim God and Arc really still have high-level performance in them, but they're just not as flexible as a bunch of other players are on their similar roles. And so I think what this Justice team has is they have a good foundation going forward. They had a lot of turmoil throughout the season with players leaving. They obviously changed the direction of the team from a mixed roster to a full Korean roster. Supreme as the full-time head coach by the end of the season. It's a team that was building, and it was a team that after the 2019 season had kind of been in the same place. They didn't do enough after 2019. I think this Justice team knows that they need to make sure that they are good. They need to be aggressive in free agency and bring in some strong players, but you have to give them credit for what they were able to do in the playoffs. They beat the likes of the Florida Mayhem, the LA Valiant, the Dallas Fuel, some pretty good teams, some teams who are definitely better than them in terms of their overall season standings and season position. And you have to give a lot of credit to this Justice team for doing what they were able to do. How much success they find in the future is really dependent on whether or not they can hold on to Decay. But I think you have to give a ton of credit to this Justice team for being able to find success late in the season when it really, really mattered most. Moving on to number 16, I have the Toronto Defiant. An interesting team, you could maybe say that the Justice were better than them. The Defiant had some decent results throughout the season. Obviously, they made the semifinals of the Summer Showdown, which, like I said, a little odd just because of the way the meta worked. But hey, a semifinals is a semifinals. You gotta give a lot of credit to the Defiant for being able to do that. They had some decent performances at the beginning of the season as well. They had a win over the Paris Eternal. They had a very close series with the Philadelphia Fusion. But by the end of the season, it really seemed like the Defiant had kind of just fallen off. Their playstyle had become very kind of passive and sluggish and slow and very uninspiring. They're a team who knows that they're good players, but they don't really seem to have all the pieces they need to be able to succeed. They had problems at main tank all season. Neither Beast nor Numlocked were really able to bring a ton of success to this team. I think main support was a bit of a problem going from Kellex to Cruz. Well, I think Cruz was fine. It's difficult to kind of switch up things like that. And DPS, they had some obvious problems. We saw a lot of switching between Logics and Surefour and Agilities and Zik. And I think this is a team that really just didn't have an identity. And I think that's where they really struggled. So I'm curious to see what this team does going forward. If they make coaching changes, which I think probably will happen. And I think we'll probably see some changes to their tank line potentially. Try to bring in some more players, bring in some new talent, maybe some younger talent. They brought in a lot of older veteran talent. So I think it'll be interesting to see what this Defiant team does. Ultimately, though, I had them at 16 because while they had some good results, they were never really able to put it all together. And that is kind of the biggest flaw that they had all season. At number 15, I have the Dallas Fuel. Obviously, it has been a very hectic season for the Dallas Fuel. Many players have come and go throughout the season with a lot of controversy surrounding this Dallas Fuel team, but all that considered, I have them here at 15. They were certainly better as a whole throughout the season than Toronto, Washington, Houston, Vancouver, and Boston. Yes, they lost to the Washington Justice in the playoffs, but a lot of teams did. It is what it is. The thing with the Dallas Fuel is they were a team that had moments where you could argue they were a very good team, and then they just were never really able to put it all together. They would have a good week, they would struggle the next week. They lost to the Vancouver Titans 3-0 one week, and they 3-0 the Toronto Defiant the next week. They were very inconsistent. They had a lot of issues and problems that were pretty apparent, just that they couldn't put together, results that they were struggling in, and it just wasn't a good look from the Dallas Fuel. They were okay, and when they brought in Onigod, he really impressed. He was a huge, huge, huge part of the success that this Dallas Fuel roster found late in the season. Doha, a very good player. Gamsu, a very good player. Note had a very good season. Obviously, adding Paintbrush was a huge, huge, huge help for this team. And I thought Crimzo had a very good year as well, making a case for being the best Western flex support in the league. But I was never really impressed by the Fuel after Decay left. When Decay wasn't playing, this Fuel roster just wasn't that good. And when he left the team just kind of lost really any type of inspiration, and I just think this Dallas Fuel roster had too many problems that they were never really able to address. I think that they need to really kind of gut this team, start from scratch, maybe hold on to a couple pieces like Gamsu or Doha, and just really kind of rebuild this team from the ground up and make it the best possible Fuel roster imaginable. It's possible, but I think this is a Fuel team that needs a lot of work to fix a lot of the problems that they've had for 3 years now. A lot of kind of legacy players, too many players on the roster. I think an environment that allowed for a lot of kind of players to really kind of step back and not really have an impact or a role. And I think that ultimately hurt this Fuel team more than anything else all season. A good Fuel roster at times, but ultimately not good enough. Moving on to number 14, I have the London Spitfire. Maybe a bit controversial that I have the London Spitfire this high. I'm very high on the Spitfire as a team. I think the Spitfire are actually a very good roster. I think they looked pretty good throughout the season. And one of the things for me that really kind of helps me with this is they were very good in North America at the beginning of the season. Now, I don't think they improved as much as some of the other teams did. Like one of their last wins in North America before COVID hit was against the Florida Mayhem. The Florida Mayhem were not the Florida Mayhem they were by the season's end, and the London Spitfire probably only got slightly better. But when you consider the fact that the London Spitfire, yes, they managed 6 wins all season, and I believe 3 of those wins came from when they were in North America. Yeah, they had a very rough time in Asia. They didn't perform super well when they were playing in Asia. But when you're playing the likes of New York and Shanghai and Guangzhou and even Hangzhou and Chengdu and Seoul, like there's just some very good teams in Asia that are just very difficult to beat. This Spitfire roster had good performances, though. When they were in Asia, they had some close matches with the Charge, some close matches with the Dragons. They had a decently close series with New York. And they had some close series with the Dynasty. This is a Spitfire roster that I think if they were in North America would be better than a lot of teams in North America. I think they would be competing with a lot of some kind of upper level teams like your LA teams, your Florida Mayhem, your Atlanta Reign, that kind of level of team. I think that this is a London Spitfire roster that has the ability to compete with teams at that level, but they just struggled from being in a tough region in Asia. Now, they were very clearly the weakest team in Asia come the end of the season. They never really hit a stride like a team like CHENGDU did going into the Countdown Cup, where CHENGDU, the meta just worked for them, and they were really able to kind of pull it together and late in the season have a really good run. London never had that. They had a lot of talent on the roster, a lot of very good players. Bernard, Sanguinar, Glister, those 3 in particular were really impressive all season. Plus, Hailey was good, JMac was good. I thought every DPS player on this London Spitfire roster looked good all season, at least at times throughout the season. So it's a very interesting team to look at and see kind of where they were. Yes, they had problems. Yes, they weren't a top-level team, but I think that they were better than what a lot of people will give them credit for because of the region they played in. I think if they were in North America, they would have had way more wins than what they ended up with. So I have them here at number 14. Moving on to number 13, I have the Chengdu Hunters. The Chengdu Hunters managed 8 wins in a very tough APAC region. Now, it should be noted that one of those wins was a tournament win because they got to the semifinals of the Countdown Cup. So really it was 7 wins in a tough region. But I don't want to take anything away from Chengdu. I thought that they had some up and down performances, especially early in the season. But I think once they had some changes going into the Countdown Cup, I thought the Chengdu Hunters looked very good. I thought even going into the playoffs, they looked decent. They had a very dominant win over London Spitfire. They really pushed New York multiple times throughout the season. They're a team that can do anything they really want to. They're an unexpected team. They're a weird team. They're a fun team to watch. And I think that this Chengdu Hunters team really stuck to what they are. I expect some changes, of course, going into 2021. Obviously, we know they have a new head coach, so that is a huge change, or I guess a return to their old coach, bringing him back in. It's going to be interesting to see what this Chengdu Hunters roster is able to do with some of these changes. I'm intrigued by the Chengdu Hunters as always, but I think that at the end of the day, this is a team who had some very good performances throughout the season. They beat Shanghai. Not many teams can say that they beat the Shanghai Dragons, and the Chengdu Hunters did it. And the Chengdu Hunters are a team where I think they have a lot of potential and a lot of talent, and I think that they have just always struggled from being a team that doesn't play the same way as everybody else. And I think that that is both a blessing and a curse because it hurts you for scrimming. Not many teams are going to want to scrim a team that doesn't play traditional styles because what are you going to learn from them? But it also means that they're comfortable playing what they can play. They know who they are. They're not trying to force things when we see a lot of teams in the past kind of try to force a style that isn't them, and it just ends up hurting them more than anything else. So I think the Chengdu Hunters are a very good team. I think they're a team to look out for. They obviously are not going to be world beaters anytime soon based on what we saw from them this past season, but they have a lot of talent on this roster, and I think that they could eventually be a legit contender for some type of title. Maybe not a Grand Finals championship, but I think if this team can get hot at the right time, they have what it takes to have a really nice performance in a tournament. And I'm excited to see what this team does. I think they were very unfairly kind of judged based on being in a very tough region. So I think the Chengdu Hunters team is very good, and I have them here at 13. Moving on to number 12, I have the Atlanta Reign. They finished season 10 and 11, but notably with a +9 differential. The best differential of any team with a losing record, and a better differential than some teams with a positive record. The problem with the Atlanta Reign is that they really struggled against teams even in their area. They would beat down on the bad teams. They would beat down on Houston. They would beat down on Vancouver and Washington and Boston. And except for the fact, they did lose to Vancouver. But they were never really competing with anybody very good. They had one good series with the Philadelphia Fusion. Beyond that, they got beat badly by everybody they played that was better than them. And maybe they would occasionally get a win against a Valiant or a Gladiators, though I don't think they beat the Gladiators at all. I think they had a win against the Mayhem early in the season before the Mayhem got really good, but the Atlanta Reign were just never really able to do much of anything. Yeah, they got the playoff win against the Paris Eternal, but the Paris Eternal weren't really playing to their strengths then. They didn't look very good then. This Atlanta Reign team was really disappointing. I think a lot of people had high hopes for them. A lot of people had a lot of high expectations for this team. They were a very good team back in 2019. This year they struggled a lot. Losing Baby Bay didn't help them at all. And I think when you look at what the Atlanta Reign were able to do, it just didn't. It doesn't breathe a lot of confidence when this is a team that has just struggled so much to find consistency and to be able to kind of meet the potential that we know that this team has. And for me, ultimately, that's what it comes down to. It's very difficult to look at this team and to see a ton of potential and just watch it not come together. And I think the Atlanta Reign have just never really been able to piece things together with the pieces that they had. I think that the tank line struggled more than what was expected. Losing some of the consistency that Baby Bay brought, I think, hurt a lot. I think hero pools hurt them a bit, and just players' lack of flexibility potentially. So I like the Atlanta Reign as a team. I think they had a lot of good pieces. I don't think they were really able to put it together, so I have them here at 12. Finally, for this first video, at number 11, I have the Hangzhou Spark. I am sure there are going to be people who criticize me for putting the Spark this high. The Spark are a team that had a lot of promise coming into the season. They were the number 4 seeded team in the 2019 season. They were one of the best teams in the league. And now I think there's a lot of people who look at this team and say they were a huge disappointment and that they are not really deserving of being at a spot this high on a power rankings. And it's still not a great spot. 11's not good. It's still, you're a below average team, I guess, in a way. But I thought the Hangzhou Spark actually had pretty good performances. And I think when you look at what they were able to do in the Countdown Cup, yes, they didn't have to play New York or Guangzhou or Shanghai until the finals. Those three were on another side of the bracket. Hangzhou only had to worry about facing the Seoul Dynasty, the London Spitfire, Chengdu Hunters. Those are the only 3 teams on that side of the bracket. If you're the Hangzhou Spark, you feel pretty good. You feel like you can do that. This Hangzhou Spark team managed to get 10 wins this season. When you look at the way this team was playing at the very beginning of the season, before they had Architect, before they had QOQ, they had tons of just movement and things that were changing. They moved pieces around throughout the season. They had players playing from China, while the rest of the team was playing from Korea. This Spark team still managed to get 10 wins, plus a second place in the Countdown Cup. This Spark team I thought was pretty good. They obviously had problems. I think support line issues were kind of notable. IDK didn't play super well this season, when in 2019 he was a very good player. His Lucio performances were much better in 2019 than in 2020, so we saw a lot of Mika in 2020. Obviously, they had some tank problems with Rhea and Sasin that they fixed a bit by bringing in QOQ, and I think they tried to force things with some other tank players at times. Didn't really work super well. I love Gushui as a player. I think he is a top 3 main tank by talent in the league. I think he's really good, and he has such a diverse hero pool, and he can play pretty much every main tank hero. at a super high level. I don't think he played as well this season as he did back in 2019, so definitely a bit of a hindrance to their success there. And obviously, Godsby was, for the first half of the season, really just trying to carry this team on his back when Adora and Bazi and even Otto didn't have the best performances for the team. But by the time they brought in Architect and QOQ, I thought this Hangzhou Spark team was actually pretty good. And I think that they really were able to put a lot of stuff together, and they were able to kind of figure things out. They had a coaching change late in the season, but they were able to get wins against teams they probably would never have been favored against. And yeah, when you play teams a lot, eventually you're going to try to find a way to win, with the exception of the Shanghai Dragons, but very few teams are able to beat the Shanghai Dragons anyway. The Hangzhou Spark really were a team that impressed me through these challenges. I mean, they signed an anime girl to their team. Like, I mean, that's got to be worth something as well. I don't know of any other Overwatch League team signing an anime girl to the team, so hey, Hangzhou Spark, you finished with a winning record because of a tournament performance you did very well in. I think the Hangzhou Spark deserve a lot of credit for what they were able to do late in the season. They are a team that I think was better than what people give them credit for. And I think that, all things considered, the Hangzhou Spark would have done pretty well in North America. I think they were better than the Atlanta Reign. I think they would have beaten down hard on Dallas and Toronto and Houston and London. Well, I guess London was in APAC. And Vancouver and Washington and Boston. Maybe not playoffs Washington, but most of regular season Washington. I think the Hangzhou Spark were a better team than what people give them credit for, so I have them here at number 11. So that is it for the first part of my power rankings. Just a quick little recap and review. I have the Boston Uprising at 20, the Vancouver Titans at 19, the Houston Outlaws at 18, the Washington Justice at 17, the Toronto Defiant at 16, the Dallas Fuel at 15, the London Spitfire at 14, the Chengdu Hunters at 13, the Atlanta Reign at 12, and the Hangzhou Spark at 11. On Friday, I'll have part 2 of the power rankings, where I go over my teams in positions 10 through 1. So, until next time, I hope you are all staying safe and staying healthy. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this in the future. Comment down below your thoughts on my rankings, as I would love to hear them from you. But that is all from me. Thank you so much. I will see you all next time, and bye-bye.